I picked up a letter that was addressed to my wife, saying how pleased a certain man was with that hot night, how good she was in bed. I wanted to feed her that letter after that. Now I will tell you how it all started. I still remember that day vividly, a Tuesday, of all days. Nothing special, just another workday in the middle of an endless work week. It was a bit colder than usual, and the trees outside were nearly bare, their limbs outstretched against a gray sky like skeletons pleading for the sun. I had just returned home after a long morning meeting, the kind that stretches on so endlessly you lose track of time, and your mind wanders to lunch halfway through. But that day, fate had other plans. Pulling up to our house, I noticed the mail truck parked out front, and the postman was already making his way up to our door. I didn't think much of it at first, just assumed he was bringing the usual stack of bills and junk mail. But as he approached, I saw he held a single envelope, an unusual sight amidst the usual clutter of coupons and flyers. I greeted him with a wave, feeling a rare burst of friendliness, maybe because it was just one letter. That's all. One simple letter, not a big stack of things to sort through later. But as he got closer, I caught the odd way he hesitated, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He extended the letter toward me, yet it seemed as though he was considering holding it back. "Here you go, Mr. Reynolds," he said, though his voice wavered ever so slightly. I reached for it instinctively. "Thanks," I replied, glancing down at the envelope. It bore my wife's name, Laura Reynolds, and nothing more. No return address, no company logo. Just a plain, unmarked envelope with handwriting I didn't recognize. And maybe it was the way the postman looked at me before handing it over, or maybe it was something deeper, but an odd feeling began to settle over me. Before I could question it further, I heard the sound of Laura's footsteps. She appeared at the door, her eyes wide as she saw me holding the letter. Her reaction was quick, faster than I expected. "Is that mine?" she asked, her voice tight. I nodded, studying her expression. "Yes, a letter for you." "Thank you," she said, stepping closer, her hand outstretched, but I didn't hand it over right away. For some reason, I felt frozen, as if giving her that letter would let go of something I couldn't put into words. I looked down at her, and she looked up at me with that flicker of nervousness she rarely wore. The tension in the air was strange, thick, almost palpable. "What's going on, Laura?" I asked, my voice quieter than I'd intended. She blinked, her eyes darting to the envelope, then back to me. "Nothing," she replied, though her tone betrayed her. Before I knew it, I had ripped open the envelope. Laura's face fell, and she reached out as if to stop me, but it was too late. The contents were already in my hands, and with each line I read, a new wave of icy disbelief washed over me. I scanned the letter quickly, my heart racing faster with every word. The letter wasn't just any letter. It was intimate, painfully so, full of words that a stranger should never read, written with such raw emotion that I could almost feel it dripping from the ink. It was from someone named Sam, a man I didn't know, who apparently knew my wife better than I ever could have imagined. He wrote about their last night together, a memory that was fresh enough for him to recall every detail, to recount things only Laura and he should know. My hands shook as I read the final line, "Missing you already, until next time." I could barely breathe. I looked up from the letter, staring at Laura. Her face was white, drained of color. She didn't say anything, didn't even try to take it back. She just stood there, waiting, like someone about to be sentenced. "How long?" I managed to ask, my voice strangled. "Charlie, she began, her voice barely more than a whisper. "How long, Laura?" I repeated, each word stabbing out like a knife. She glanced down, her eyes pooling with a strange mix of shame and fear. "A few months," she said, her voice so faint I could barely hear her. "It wasn't. I didn't mean for it to happen." I let out a bitter laugh, unable to believe I was hearing this. "Didn't mean for it to happen? Are you serious, Laura?" She reached out for my arm, but I stepped back, my anger boiling up. Don't try to explain it away like it's some accident. People don't accidentally find themselves sneaking around for months, writing love letters behind their husband's back." Her shoulders slumped, and I could see the pain in her eyes, The regret that I hadn't noticed until that moment. But it was too late. Regret didn't erase what was written in that letter, and it didn't erase the fact that she had betrayed me in a way I'd never thought possible. I turned away, my mind racing, replaying memories that were now stained with doubt. Every late night, every rushed goodbye, every excuse she'd made over the past few months, it all began to click into place with a cruel clarity. "Charlie, please," she whispered. Her voice choked. "Please let me explain." I took a deep breath, steadying myself before turning to face her again. "All right, Laura. Explain. Explain why you threw away our marriage for some stranger who doesn't even have the courage to show his face." He's not," she trailed off, struggling for words. "Oh, please, don't tell me he's not just some stranger," I said, the bitterness in my voice surprising even myself. "Because that's exactly what he is to me, Laura. Just some faceless man who decided to step into my life, into my marriage." I could see the words cutting into her, but I didn't care. I wanted her to feel the same pain that was ripping through me. And as I watched her, I realized that this was only the beginning. The letter had opened a door I could never close again, a door that led to a version of our life that I hadn't even known existed. Finally, after what felt like hours, Laura spoke again, her voice small, defeated. "Charlie, I don't know what to say. I never wanted this. I made a mistake." Her words hung in the air, hollow and insincere, as if even she didn't believe them. I shook my head, feeling a strange, heavy calm wash over me. "A mistake," I repeated, the word echoing in my mind. It felt laughably small compared to the weight of what she'd done, the enormity of the betrayal that had shattered everything I thought we'd built together. Without another word, I walked to the door, the letter still clutched in my hand. Laura called after me, her voice filled with desperation, but I didn't look back. I couldn't. I stepped outside, the cold air biting against my face. I felt numb, as though the world around me had shifted, leaving me in some parallel reality where nothing made sense anymore. Standing there on the porch, I took a deep breath and looked down at the letter one last time. Its words seared into my mind. In that moment, I knew that this was only the beginning of a journey I hadn't chosen, a journey that would take me places I never wanted to go. But there was no going back now. The truth was out, and it was time to face whatever came next. The next few days passed in a fog. I stayed at a motel just outside town, too hurt to face Laura, too unsure of what my next steps should be. I spent those nights lying awake, replaying the memories that now felt like lies, dissecting every interaction, every quiet smile, every embrace that felt different in hindsight. I kept the letter in my pocket, reading it over and over as if, with enough scrutiny, I could find an answer hidden between the lines. Laura texted and called constantly. Each time her name flashed on my phone screen, my chest tightened. The messages ranged from apologies to pleas, with some trying to explain what happened, as if anything could make it right. I ignored them all. On the third night, I broke down and called my best friend, Ben. We hadn't spoken much in the last few months. Work had taken me further from my friends than I'd like, and though Ben and I had been close for years, life had just gotten in the way. But tonight, I needed someone who wasn't Laura. Someone who would tell me what to do because I felt so lost. Ben answered almost immediately, his usual gruff voice softening when he heard my strained hello. "Charlie, man, what's going on?" "It's late," he said, his tone laced with concern. "Ben, I need to talk," I replied, my voice hoarse. "It's Laura. She's been having an affair." The words felt strange in my mouth, foreign, like they belonged to someone else's life. Saying them aloud made it real in a way that reading the letter hadn't. "Wait, what? Laura? Are you sure?" His voice was a mixture of shock and anger, but there was something else there too, a tone I couldn't place. "Yeah, I'm sure. I found a letter. From him." She admitted everything. I took a shaky breath, reliving the moment I read that letter for the first time. Ben was silent for a moment, letting the weight of my confession settle. "Jesus, Charlie, I don't even know what to say. You must be. God, I'm so sorry, man." "Yeah, thanks," I muttered, feeling numb all over again. I don't know what to do. Well, let me ask you something. Do you still love her? The question hit me hard. Did I? Could I even answer that right now? After everything she'd done? I don't know, Ben, I replied honestly. Right now, I feel broken. I love the woman I thought she was. But this? I don't even know who she is anymore. Ben sighed, and I could almost picture him running a hand through his hair, the way he did when he was trying to come up with the right words. Listen, I know this doesn't help, but you're not alone in this. You'd be surprised how often this happens. And sometimes, people get through it. Charlie. They find a way to move on together. I don't know if I can do that, Ben. Every time I close my eyes, all I see is that letter. Ben's voice softened. I get it, man. And I'm here for you. Whatever you need. I'm not saying you have to forgive her, but you owe it to yourself to figure out what you really want. After we hung up, I felt a bit lighter, like someone had helped me carry a fraction of the weight. But the relief was fleeting. By morning, I was drowning again in questions, with answers that slipped away as soon as I tried to catch them. The next day, I finally went home. I wasn't sure if I was ready, but I knew I couldn't hide forever. Laura was waiting for me, pacing in the living room, her eyes red and puffy. She looked fragile, like a porcelain doll about to shatter, but there was something else in her eyes. Hope, maybe, or desperation. Charlie, she began, but I held up a hand to stop her. Just, let's not do this right now, I said, my voice sharper than I'd intended. I dropped my keys on the table, feeling the exhaustion pull at me. I'm here to figure things out, not to listen to excuses. Laura flinched, but nodded, biting her lip as she held back whatever she'd been about to say. We stood in silence for a moment, neither of us knowing what to do or say. She took a step toward me, as if reaching for some invisible bridge between us, but I turned away, heading upstairs. In the bedroom, I stared at the bed we had shared for years, feeling the familiar ache rise in my chest. It was our bed, but now it felt tainted, like an unwelcome stranger had left his shadow there. I couldn't sleep here, not yet. I walked back downstairs to the living room, where Laura had sunk onto the couch, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. After a few moments, she broke the silence. Can we just talk, Charlie? Please. I looked at her, feeling torn. Part of me wanted to tell her to keep her explanations to herself, to let her drown in the guilt of what she'd done. But the other part of me, the part that had shared so much with her, needed to hear it. Fine, I said, sitting across from her, keeping as much distance between us as the room allowed. Start talking. She took a deep breath, staring down at her hands. It started a few months ago, she whispered. I didn't go looking for it, Charlie, I swear. Sam and we were friends first, just friends. I scoffed, the bitterness rising up again. Yeah? Friends don't write love letters, Laura. Friends don't sneak around behind each other's backs. I know, she whispered, her voice breaking. I know. I made a horrible mistake. But it wasn't. I wasn't trying to replace you, Charlie. I was lost. I felt like I was disappearing, like I didn't know who I was anymore. I clenched my fists, struggling to keep my voice steady. So you thought the best way to find yourself was with another man? Do you have any idea what you've done, Laura? How badly you've hurt me? Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she looked at me with such raw pain that, for a moment, my own anger wavered. But I couldn't let myself feel sorry for her. Not after everything. I know, Charlie. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't even know if I can forgive myself. She paused, her gaze distant, like she was remembering something painful. Sam, he's nothing, okay? He's nobody. He's not you. Her words hung in the air, hollow and empty, and I realized that nothing she said could change the fact that she'd betrayed me. She could beg, she could cry, she could swear that it meant nothing. But the reality was there, stark and cold, like a scar that would never heal. Then why? I asked, my voice quieter now, more broken than angry. Why throw everything away for someone who meant nothing? She hesitated, looking down at her hands. Because I was scared. Scared that I'd lost you. You were always so distant lately, Like you were slipping away from me, and I didn't know how to reach you." Her words stung, but I couldn't deny there was some truth in them. Work had consumed me in the past year, the late nights and constant travel wearing me down until I barely had time for anything else. But that didn't make what she'd done okay. Nothing could. "Don't you dare put this on me," I said, my voice rising. "I didn't abandon you, Laura. I was here. I was here every single day, giving you everything I could. You're the one who walked away." She flinched, and her face crumpled as fresh tears streamed down her cheeks. "I know, Charlie. I know. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know that I love you. I always have. And I want to make this right. I'll do whatever it takes." Her words should have comforted me, should have given me hope. But instead, they felt hollow, like an apology too late. I looked at her, the woman I'd loved for so long, and felt like I was staring at a stranger. Everything between us had changed, fractured into pieces I wasn't sure could be put back together. The silence stretched between us, heavy and painful, until finally I stood up, the weight of it all pressing down on me. "I need some time, Laura," I said quietly. "I don't know if I can, if I want to forgive you. I just need to be alone." She nodded, her shoulders slumping, as if she'd been expecting it. "I understand." Without another word, I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, feeling the cold air hit me as I stepped outside. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay. Not right now. As I drove aimlessly through the dark, empty streets, I thought of all the things I'd lost, of the life I'd thought was mine, now lying in ruins. I found myself back at the motel by midnight, staring blankly at the floral-patterned wallpaper, the silence pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't shake. In the days that followed, I tried to carry on with my life, pretending like things were normal. But everything felt wrong. Each day was a shade of the life I'd once known. I was drowning in thoughts of Laura, of Sam, of all the years we had spent together, which now seemed tainted beyond repair. Every time I tried to convince myself to move forward, a quiet voice would question if I could ever truly let go. On the fifth night, I woke up to a message notification on my phone. It was a number I didn't recognize, and the text was brief: "We need to talk. Meet me at Lyle's Cafe, 8 a.m., Sam." I stared at the message, my heart pounding. Sam. The name was now etched into my life like a bruise I couldn't ignore. I wanted nothing more than to delete the message, to push it aside and pretend it didn't exist. But curiosity, or maybe anger, won out in the end. If there was any chance that meeting him could give me answers, to help me make sense of what Laura had done, I had to take it. I arrived at Lyle's Cafe early, the small-town diner still half asleep in the morning light. The waitress, a young woman with a warm smile, showed me to a booth by the window. I ordered coffee and waited, the minutes stretching endlessly. Then he walked in. Sam was exactly the kind of man I'd expected, and yet he wasn't. He had a wiry frame, with a sharp, angular face and tired eyes that seemed much older than his actual age. He wore a simple jacket, his clothes practical and worn, not at all the flashy, charismatic type I'd imagined him to be. He looked more ordinary than anything. I felt an absurd sense of disappointment at that. He spotted me immediately, his gaze meeting mine with an intensity that was both uncomfortable and disarming. He walked over and sat down across from me, resting his hands on the table. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, I broke the silence. "So, you're Sam." He nodded, his eyes never leaving mine. "And you must be Charlie." The waitress brought my coffee and left us alone. I took a sip, the bitterness of it settling into my chest as I looked at him. There were 1,000 questions I wanted to ask, but one rose to the surface first. "Why?" The word came out as more of a sigh than a question. "Why did you do this?" He didn't look away, his face calm but his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. Regret, maybe, or shame. "It wasn't supposed to happen, Charlie. I didn't go looking for it. I didn't even know she was married until—" He trailed off, looking down at his hands. "Until it was too late?" I finished for him, my tone sharper than I'd intended. He nodded, his jaw tightening. "Look, I know this probably doesn't mean much, but I never wanted to hurt anyone, least of all you. You didn't just hurt me, Sam, I replied, my voice steady but cold. You destroyed everything I thought I had. You took my wife, my life, and for what? A fling? He shifted in his seat, his hands clenching on the tabletop. It wasn't like that. I know it probably seems meaningless to you, but I cared about her, Charlie. I still do. I felt a fresh wave of anger wash over me. You don't even know her. You don't know the life we've built together, the memories, the plans we had. You just waltzed in and took whatever you wanted. Sam looked away, a flicker of guilt crossing his face. You're right. I don't know her like you do. I never could. And I'll be honest, I don't even know what this was supposed to be with her. I think we were both just lost. Lost. That word, so simple and yet so vast, struck something in me. Had Laura felt lost? Had I? The anger inside me began to dull, replaced by a hollow emptiness. I wanted to keep hating him, to cling to the fury that had been holding me together since I'd read that letter. But sitting here, looking at him, just another flawed person tangled up in this mess, I felt myself unraveling. So what now? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He met my gaze, his eyes filled with a quiet sadness. That's up to you, Charlie. I've already told her it's over. I don't want to be the reason someone else's life falls apart. Too late for that, I muttered, staring down at my coffee. There was a pause, and then he stood up, hesitating before he left. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I am. I watched him walk out, his figure disappearing into the cold morning light. For a long time, I sat there alone, the coffee in front of me growing cold, my mind numb. I'd expected answers, some kind of clarity or closure. But instead, I felt more lost than ever. The next few weeks passed in a haze. Laura and I moved around each other like strangers, speaking only when necessary, the silence between us thick and suffocating. I avoided being home as much as possible, filling my time with work or meaningless errands, anything to keep my mind occupied. But no matter where I went, the memories followed. One night, I found myself parked outside my office, unable to bring myself to go home. The truth was, I didn't know if I could keep pretending that things might return to normal. I had built my entire life around Laura, believing she was the one person who would never betray me. But that illusion had been shattered, and now I didn't know who I was without it. I drove aimlessly, winding through quiet streets, my mind drifting. Eventually, I found myself at the edge of town, near a small lake where Laura and I had spent countless evenings when we were younger. It was here that I had proposed to her, under a sky full of stars, with nothing but hope in my heart. Sitting there, I realized that the man who had made that promise was gone. I was someone else now, someone bitter, broken, and angry. And as much as I wanted to go back, to rewind the clock and undo everything that had happened, I knew that was impossible. The next morning, I woke up to another message on my phone, this time from Laura. Please, can we talk? I stared at the message for a long time, the urge to delete it almost overpowering. But something stopped me. Despite everything, there was a part of me that wanted answers, that wanted to understand how we had gotten here. So, I replied. We met at a park near our house, the same park where we'd taken countless walks, where we'd laughed and planned and dreamed. She was waiting on a bench when I arrived, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed. She looked up at me as I approached, her gaze filled with a mix of guilt and desperation. Thank you for coming, she said quietly. I nodded, standing awkwardly, unsure of what to say. I had replayed this moment in my mind 100 times, imagining myself demanding answers, yelling, making her feel the same pain she'd caused me. But now that I was here, I felt strangely empty. Why, Laura? I asked finally, my voice barely a whisper. Why did you do it? She looked down, her hands twisting in her lap. I don't know, Charlie. I wish I had an answer, something that would make sense. But I was scared. Scared of losing you, scared of losing myself. I don't know who I am without you, but I don't know who I am with you anymore, either. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had always thought of our marriage as a safe harbor, a place where we could weather any storm together. But now it felt like the very foundation of that harbor was crumbling, slipping away beneath us. I gave you everything, Laura. I trusted you. And you threw it all away for, what? A man you barely knew? She looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears. I didn't throw it away, Charlie. I was drowning, and I didn't know how to reach you. Sam wasn't. He wasn't what I wanted. I wanted you. But I was too scared to ask for it. I felt a pang of something, sympathy, maybe, or regret. As much as I wanted to hate her, to see her as the villain in this story, I couldn't. She was just as lost as I was, trapped in a marriage that had become something we hadn't anticipated, something we hadn't planned for. So what now? I asked, my voice hollow. She looked down, her fingers twisting in her lap. I don't know, Charlie. I don't know if we can fix this, but I want to try. I want to find a way back, if you'll let me. I stared at her, the woman I had loved for so long, and felt the weight of everything we'd lost pressing down on me. Could I forgive her? Could I find it in myself to let go of the pain, to rebuild what we'd broken? I don't know if I can forgive you, Laura, I said finally, my voice shaking, but I'll try. I don't know if it'll ever be the same, but I'll try. She nodded, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. And as we sat there in silence, I felt a tiny flicker of something inside me, a spark, fragile and faint, but they're all the same. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something. It was a start. Trying. That was all we promised each other as we stood in that park, the cold wind tugging at our coats and the memory of betrayal still lingering in the air between us. We didn't promise to forgive, to forget, or even to rebuild what had been shattered. We only promised to try. And somehow, that was enough to take the first tentative step forward. But trying was harder than I'd imagined. The first few days back in the house together felt strained, as if we were living in a museum of our past, carefully tiptoeing around our shared history. We fell into a routine of forced conversations and hollow attempts at reconnecting, each exchange feeling like a fragile truce. Laura kept herself busy around the house, cooking elaborate meals, planning small weekend outings, and trying to make our home feel like it had before. And though I could see her effort, I was numb to it. The ghost of Sam still hung over everything she did, an invisible reminder of the cracks that had formed between us. One night, a week after our conversation at the park, Laura suggested that we take a short trip together. Just a few days, she said, somewhere quiet where we could reconnect without the weight of our usual routines. Part of me wanted to reject the idea outright, to tell her that no amount of getaways could change what had happened. But another part of me, the part that remembered the years of happiness we'd shared, agreed to go, if only to see if there was anything left to save. We arrived at a small bed and breakfast nestled in the mountains, far from anyone we knew, far from anything familiar. It was the kind of place Laura would have chosen before, quiet and cozy, with antique furniture and old books lining the shelves. She seemed hopeful, her expression softening as she took in the surroundings. But I felt out of place, like a stranger intruding on a memory. That evening, as we sat by the fire in the small sitting room, Laura reached for my hand, her fingers warm and tentative against mine. I let her hold it, even though every instinct told me to pull away. "Charlie," she said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. "I know it might be too late, but I want to tell you everything." I looked at her, seeing the sincerity in her eyes, the determination mixed with a glimmer of fear. "Everything?" I echoed, unsure if I was ready to hear it. She nodded, her fingers tightening around mine. "If there's any chance of us moving forward, I need to be honest with you. About everything." I swallowed, feeling the weight of the moment press down on me. Part of me wanted to know, to understand, to dissect every decision she'd made so I could somehow make sense of it all. But another part of me, the part that still clung to anger and resentment, didn't want to give her that chance, didn't want to open myself up to more pain. "All right," I said finally, my voice cold. "Tell me." She took a deep breath, her gaze distant, as if she was searching for the right words. "It started last year," she began, "when you took on that project, the one that had you working late every night. At first, I tried to be supportive, but I felt so alone, Charlie. I felt like you were slipping away from me, and I didn't know how to hold on. I clenched my jaw, the bitterness rising up again. So, instead of talking to me, you went to him. Her eyes filled with tears, but she held my gaze. I didn't mean to, Charlie. I know that sounds like an excuse, but it's the truth. Sam and I, we met through work. He was just a colleague at first, someone to have lunch with, to talk to. But then things changed. Why him, Laura? I asked, my voice raw. What did he give you that I couldn't? She hesitated, looking down at her hands. He was present. He listened. He didn't make me feel like an afterthought. Her words stung, cutting deeper than I'd expected. I had been distant, I knew that. But hearing it from her, knowing that my absence had pushed her into someone else's arms, felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I'm not blaming you, she added quickly, as if sensing my pain. This was my choice, my mistake. I know that. But I want you to understand. I was lost, Charlie, and he was there. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. So, what? You were lonely, and he just happened to be around? That's all it took? She shook her head, fresh tears slipping down her cheeks. No, it was more than that. I didn't just wake up one day and decide to betray you. It was the series of small choices, small steps that led me somewhere I never meant to go. I let her words sink in, the weight of them pressing down on me. A part of me wanted to believe her, to see her as the woman I'd loved for so long, someone who had simply lost her way. But another part of me, the part that still held on to the betrayal, couldn't let go. So what now? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and regret. I want to rebuild, Charlie. I know it won't be easy, and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I want to try. I want to earn back your trust, if you'll let me. Her words hung in the air, heavy and uncertain. I didn't know if I could trust her again, if I could ever look at her without seeing the shadow of her betrayal. But sitting here, in this quiet room far from home, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in weeks, a tiny, fragile hope. Let's take it one day at a time, I said finally, my voice steady but cold. I can't promise anything, Laura, but I'll try. She nodded, a glimmer of relief in her eyes. And as we sat there in silence, the fire casting soft shadows across the room, I felt a strange sense of peace, as if, for the first time in weeks, I could breathe. The trip ended quietly, without any dramatic revelations or tearful promises. We returned home, slipping back into our lives with a new sense of uncertainty. Laura continued to reach out, trying to bridge the gap between us, but I kept my distance, unsure if I could open myself up to her again. Weeks turned into months, and though the anger and pain began to dull, the trust was still gone. I found myself watching her, analyzing every word, every action, searching for signs of sincerity, for proof that she truly wanted to make things right. And though she never gave me a reason to doubt her, the shadow of Sam lingered, haunting every corner of our lives. One evening, after a particularly quiet dinner, Laura looked at me, her expression weary. Charlie, I don't know how much longer I can live like this, she said softly. I want to move forward, but it feels like we're stuck, like we're going in circles. I looked at her, feeling the familiar weight of sadness settle over me. She was right. We were stuck, trapped in a cycle of half-hearted attempts at reconciliation, too afraid to move forward, too broken to go back. Maybe, I began, my voice hesitant. Maybe we need to let go, Laura. Her eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head. I don't want to let go, Charlie. I don't want to lose you. I reached across the table, taking her hand in mine. Maybe we already lost each other, I said quietly. Maybe we're just holding on to something that doesn't exist anymore. Her tears spilled over, and she looked down, her shoulders slumping. I don't want to believe that, she whispered. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to hold on, to fight for the life we'd built together. But another part of me, the part that had been shattered by her betrayal, knew that some things couldn't be fixed. Some scars were too deep to heal. The next morning, I woke up before dawn, the house silent around me. I stood in the living room, looking around at the photos on the walls, the memories we'd built together, the life we'd shared. And in that quiet moment, I knew what I had to do. I packed a small bag, leaving behind the things that no longer felt like mine. I wrote Laura a note, simple and to the point, leaving it on the kitchen table where she would find it. Laura, I tried. I wanted to rebuild, to find a way back to the life we once had. But I can't. The hurt is still there, and I don't know if it will ever fade. I hope you find peace. I hope we both do. Take care of yourself. Charlie. I stood by the door, my hand resting on the knob, feeling the weight of everything I was leaving behind. It wasn't an easy choice, but it was the only choice that felt right. And as I stepped outside, the early morning light casting a soft glow over the world, I felt a strange sense of relief. I was leaving behind the pain, the betrayal, the shattered remnants of a life that no longer felt like mine. I was free, but as I walked away, the question that haunted me was simple and devastating. Was it worth it? It's strange, the way silence can settle into your life, filling the spaces where love and laughter used to be. In the weeks that followed my departure, I thought I'd feel liberated, that shedding the weight of a broken marriage would set me free. But as each day passed, I found myself drifting, haunted by the fragments of my old life, the memories, the familiar routines, even the moments of quiet contentment that had once felt so solid. I rented a small apartment downtown, sparsely furnished and empty, just a bed and a couch, a coffee table with one chair. I'd lie awake at night, listening to the sounds of the city outside, imagining Laura on the other side of town, walking through our house alone, carrying on with her life. I wondered if she missed me, or if she'd found a way to move on, to reclaim something of herself from the wreckage we'd left behind. One evening, I took a walk, winding through the streets I'd known for years. My feet led me, almost unconsciously, back to that park near our house, the one where we'd first promised to try. I stood there by the bench where we'd talked, where she'd looked at me with such raw vulnerability. I sat down, feeling the weight of that promise settle over me like an old coat. In a moment of weakness, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my messages. The last one from Laura was still there, a simple, "I hope you're okay," that she'd sent a few days after I'd left. I hadn't replied. I wasn't sure I could. But sitting there, I typed a few words, something small and honest. "I'm okay. I hope you are too." The message sent, and I sat there in the quiet, feeling a strange mix of sadness and relief. It wasn't closure, not really, but it was something, an acknowledgement, a nod to what we'd shared and lost. And for the first time, I felt a flicker of peace. As the weeks passed, I began to settle into my new life, the ache of loss fading into something softer, more manageable. I found new routines, new places, little pieces of a life I could call my own. And though the scars of our past remained, they no longer felt as raw. I was healing, slowly, piece by piece. One afternoon, as I was walking through the city, I passed a couple holding hands, laughing as they strolled through the park. I watched them for a moment, feeling a pang of something I couldn't name. And in that instant, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I could find that again someday. A new love, a new beginning. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be the same, but it would be mine. As I turned and walked away, a small smile tugged at my lips. The road ahead was uncertain, uncharted, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face it, to let go of the past and embrace whatever lay ahead. And as I walked into the sunset, I felt a quiet, steady hope rise within me, the promise of a future, finally free from the shadows of yesterday. Subscribe to the channel and like this story if you liked it. Turn on notifications so you don't miss new stories. Click on the playlist on the right to listen to previous stories. See you soon.